Hello and welcome to the latest Oxford Sparks Facebook Live titled, Is Love Real? To answer the question, we are joined by Dr. Anna Machin, who is an evolutionary anthropologist from the Department of Experimental Psychology, whose research is based on the neurobiology and psychology of human relationships, particularly romantic and parent-child relationships. Send in your questions to Anna by commenting below as she talks to us about love and how it works, and help us with our approach to finding and maintaining a partner. So Anna, thank you for joining us today, and let's dive straight in. Can I ask, is love real?
Okay, deep one to start with. Yes, love is real. From my perspective as an evolutionary anthropologist, it's real on quite a few levels. So at the very basic biological level, it's real. We know when we put people in scanners and when we look at the activity in their brain that love produces a particular pattern of activity and is related to a particular set of neurochemicals which underpin that sensation of love. At the psychological level, definitely real. I'm sure we all know the psychological pain some of us go through in relation to our relationships, and certainly it's a very real phenomenon at the psychological level. And at the cultural level, so much, particularly in the West, poetry, theatre, television is based on that concept of romantic love. So it's very, very real.
And so is it like based on reproduction? Is there something on a deeper level because it is what evolution needs?
Absolutely. The reason we have this concept of love is because it's related to the fact that what evolution wants all animals to do is reproduce, pass those genes on. Now, humans are a little bit unusual because we form very long-term love-based bonds. And the reason why we have to do that is that our offspring, when they're born, are very dependent. And they take two parents by parental care to actually raise them to adulthood. Now, that's not something that males and females naturally want to do. Male-female cooperation is actually quite complex and it's cognitively very demanding. So what evolution's done is it's put in place a little bit of a neurochemical kicker to make us want to fall in love. So that's those three hormones in our brain. So that's beta endorphin, oxytocin and dopamine. They all mix together to make that love feeling, that euphoria, and that makes us stick together in the long term and actually stick around and raise that child to adulthood. So it's got a very strong evolutionary basis.
So do our bodies kind of make us seek certain partners and then maintain them because of our genes and neurochemistry?
Yes, there's certainly a drive to find that partner, and in most people that drive to find a long-term partner. And there's several ways we do that. It's mainly unconscious. So the hormonal and psychological underpinnings of it are unconscious. So we very much, for example, visually assess people all the time, particularly if we're single. And the reason we do that is there are a lot of visual indicators in terms of looking for a mate that tell us about the value of that mate. Now, we all have a mate value on our head. It's a little bit like the stock market. And what humans tend to do is they assortatively mate, which means they tend to end up with someone of similar mate value to themselves. Now, what constitutes that value depends on whether you're male or female. So if you're female, I'm afraid, girls, it does have a lot to do with your youth and fertility, okay? Because what the male wants is he needs to make sure that if he's going to stick around and give up all those other matings, that you are going to produce those children. So he's looking for lots of visual cues as to how young you are, but also how fertile you are. So a big one there, for example, is the waist-to-hip ratio. And we know when we put eye trackers on men that one of the first things they assess is they look at the waist and they look at the hips. And they're unconsciously calculating your waist-hip ratio. Now, the ideal, and it's universally the ideal, cross-culturally, is 0.7. And the reason why 0.7 is so important is because it actually has a very genuine link to health and fertility. So it's a good indicator to that male that the person he's going to choose is going to be able to produce those children. So that's one of the things men look for. Women, in a long-term relationship, it's slightly different because what you need is that man to stick around and help you raise that child. It's really tough to raise a child on your own. So you're looking for the indicators of dependability, of commitment, but also resources. Okay, so you need that man, particularly when you're in those heavy stages of pregnancy and those early stages of motherhood, to actually be there to stick around and help you. So you're looking for signs of resources, wealth, intelligence, perseverance, and also protection. So athleticism is always very attractive. So you're looking for those visual indicators. In terms of your genes, yes, your genes come into it because one of the things that's really key is making sure you're not too genetically related to that person. That's not good from a biological point of view. And one of the things that you will be doing, even though you don't know you're doing it, is smelling them. Because in your sweat, you actually have an indicator of a set of genes called the major histocompatibility complex. And we know that people find the other sex or the same sex attractive based on how distant that set of genes is from each other. So the further the distance is, i.e. the less likelihood there is of inbreeding, the better. You're more likely to find that person attractive.
But dating has changed over the years. Now we've got all these apps, there's all this social media. Is that a problem then? And, how can we, improve it?
Okay. I wouldn't say it's a problem. It's something that we have to learn to fit around what we need. So I think when all these apps first came out, everyone got terribly overexcited about how amazing this was, this new way of dating. We're all going to date like this. And in one sense, they're good, because what they do is they broaden the pool. So in the old days, 100 years ago, your pool would basically have been the village you lived in or the part of town you lived in. It was very hard to travel and find other people. So it's a very reduced pool. Whereas now, you go to a city, you can go on one of these apps, the city is your oyster in terms of finding someone to mate with. So in one sense, that's really good. But there are downsides. First of all, you have a paradox of choice. Because there's so much choice, sometimes we don't make a choice at all. And we dither, and we think, well, I'll just do one more swipe because the next person might be more attractive. So that can make it difficult to actually ever commit to anyone. The other problem is that you're getting a tiny, tiny bit of information about that person. And actually, when we're one-to-one and we assess somebody, there are so many different channels of communication going on. And when you're doing something like Tinder, for example, you're looking at a picture. And it's a picture that might have been filtered. It's a picture possibly from 10 years ago. And you're not getting all that information. And the way we select mates is actually really, really complex. So I would say they're good. They're a good way to start meeting someone, but you really need that one-to-one contact, because that is what helps you assess the person. And also, it's what gets the neurochemicals firing. And the neurochemicals, particularly in the early stages, oxytocin is really important, because what oxytocin does is it reduces your inhibitions to crossing the bar and saying, hi. And you don't get that from an app. So it's really important, actually, that you still use sort of in-person techniques of finding a mate.
So is love something that we need to do to stay healthy then?
Yes, love in all its different complexities is really important. So we're not just talking about romantic love, we're talking about love of our children, love of our friends. We know that there's a really strong relationship between how social somebody is and also how healthy those relationships are, and actually how physically healthy they are. So having a strong social network and one that is very supportive actually can improve your health more, for example, than quitting smoking or losing weight if you're obese. So it's really, really important. That social capital that you carry is really important for your health, and certainly for mental health. The more we learn about mental health, actually trying to take on board that social support, do things that put you out there with other people is really important, because those neurochemicals that are released when you interact with someone, not just someone you love, but a really good friend, actually are protective against things like depression and anxiety. So actually it's fundamental. We are a social animal. We evolved to be a social animal, and it's very, very important that we continue to be in-person social animals. So we don't just survive on Facebook and we don't just survive online, but we go out and we touch and we laugh and we meet.
So in that case then, is love ever bad for us?
I would say in the vast majority of cases, no. But there are circumstances and there are certain psychological profiles that you can have in relation to love that aren't necessarily particularly healthy. So, for example, if you're somebody who is particularly anxious in relationships, that's not necessarily good for your mental health. If you're someone who finds themselves becoming quite possessive or paranoid in a relationship, again, that's not necessarily a particularly healthy way to run a relationship. And certainly, obviously, some relationships, unfortunately, are abusive. And in those circumstances, those neurochemicals which bind us to that person aren't necessarily being particularly helpful. So, yes, there are circumstances in which a relationship is not good for you. But overall, I would say, on a balance, you need love in your life and you need relationships in your life, but you do have to be a little bit careful that the way you behave in relationships and the sort of relationships you get yourself into are good for you.
And you kind of drew on it just a few questions back, where you said you draw on connections between parenting and romance. Does parent-child interaction influence behaviour towards love later in life and staying with us over time?
Yes, well, evolutionarily, the very first love relationship was between a parent and child. And it's an incredibly powerful relationship, and it's the relationship which forms for that child the brain structure which will support their relationships going forward in life. So if a child has a very warm and sensitive relationship with their parent, then all that brain development that's happening, particularly in the first 2,000 days of their life, so from conception to about the second birthday, that's really, really important. Because that is when that brain structure is happening, and if you get good relationships at that time, then you get a good, healthy brain structure in relation to relationships, and that's great. If you unfortunately don't, if you're in a neglectful relationship, for example, unfortunately that can lead to major dysfunction in those brain areas, and it means that you might struggle later on in life to have healthy adult relationships. So certainly when I work with adults who maybe struggle to find relationships, quite a lot of that is grounded in their experiences as a child.
And we've got quite a few questions coming in, and one that's popped up a few times that I just want to ask you while we're on the subject. They're saying, there's a lot of love that is fake out there, and how do we cope with that?
Yes, there is a lot of love that's fake, and we have reasonably powerful instincts in relation to what is real and what is fake, because all the things that are driving you to pick that mate and pick the mate for you are unconscious. The problem we have in the modern world, and that maybe evolution is slow to catch up with, if you think a lot of these developments are really only decades old and evolution moves more slowly than that. Things like plastic surgery, things like, yes, the fact that you can filter photos. We're starting to see, particularly with things like Tinder, a slight change in particularly young males' sexual relationships. So whereas in the past, a male kind of had to do the trade to go into a long-term relationship with a woman to actually get the sexual access. That was kind of the trade-off, okay? On Tinder now, there are relationships on there that can be purely sexual, and a lot of Tinder relationships are purely sexual, which has meant that actually we're finding young males are less willing to commit to long-term relationships. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next few years, because that's a real change, and evolution hasn't caught up with that. So in particular, women are all behaving the same way, but men are starting to behave in a very different way. And that's going to be interesting to see that play out. So yeah, it is interesting how that's going to come out in the wash. But certainly, evolution is slow to catch up. And there are, obviously, yes, it's easier to fake things these days because we have more technology to fake them. But I would say your instincts, your biology is very strong, and your instincts generally are right.
And another question that keeps coming in, they're saying, is that, they tend to love the same person over and over again, the same type. Can they break that pattern if that love is bad?
Yes. We all have what we call an attachment profile, okay? And that's a psychological term which relates to how you bond to someone in a long-term relationship, how you behave in that relationship, how you experience that relationship. And we all have different attachment profiles. And none of them are wrong, but we need, in a way, to understand how we pick and behave, because in some cases it's not particularly healthy. And we have to start working against our natural attachment profile. Now, your attachment profile is not fixed for life. You can change it. So let's say you're somebody who is dismissive avoidant. Okay, what that means is you find intimacy really difficult to cope with. Okay, and you tend to push people away. So you might go into a relationship and find it incredibly exciting and intense initially, but as it starts to get maybe a little bit more serious, you'll start closing in and pushing that person away. And you might see yourself do that in relationship after relationship after relationship. But if you are aware of that behaviour, you can start counteracting it, and you can be very conscious of what you do. So yes, because attachment is a very powerful thing. Again, there is a child-parent attachment relationship, which has a very profound effect on your then romantic love attachment relationship. It can be very deep-seated, and it can take a lot of work to work against it. But I've certainly seen people change, but you have to be very conscious of what you're doing.
And, obviously we're not just talking about the same love for everybody. Love is different in different cultures. Our view of romantic love in the West versus the East is actually quite different.
Yes, so romantic love doesn't necessarily even exist in some cultures. Romantic love is very much a Western concept based on bringing the arts in, this idea of chivalry and the knight in shining armour coming to rescue you, and particularly all the romantic poets who built it up into this amazing, wonderful experience. And that's very much based on the euphoria that we feel when we're in love, and that, again, is based on your neurochemicals. But in some cultures, that concept doesn't exist, and romantic love doesn't exist. And the idea of actually, for example, forming a relationship based on love is unheard of. It's not to do with that. And there are certainly some Eastern cultures where love actually is a dirty thing to experience before you're married. So actually, you would not talk about love, experience love. It's something that should grow after marriage. So yes, our concept of romantic love is pretty Western based.
And tell us, you've been on quite a few number of shows. First of all, talk to us about being on Married at First Sight.
Okay, that was a really good experience. For me as an academic, the way we usually research relationships is we do it in hindsight. So we take some people who have either been in a really good relationship and we try to work out what it is about their psychology or their neurobiology or their genetics which makes them good at it. Or we take people who unfortunately maybe are finding it difficult and again look at all their biology and psychology and try and understand what's going on. What Married at First Sight let me do was actually look at it prospectively, so going forward. So I could actually use the knowledge I have to match people and then see how their relationship developed. So it's something that academics in my field don't generally get to do. So that was really fascinating. And we used a lot of very up-to-date techniques to do that, a lot of genetics, a lot of psychology, a lot of the attachment work, and all that stuff to do with mate value, lots of body measurements, to actually try and match people. So for me, it was a really unique opportunity. And, it was fun. It's something different.
And you've been involved recently with a BBC Earth series fronted called Meet the Humans. What's that about?
Okay, Meet the Humans is a little bit less about romantic relationships and more about the sort of relationships we build in social groups. So it's a series, a sort of fly-on-the-wall series, looking at how humans interact in particular social situations. So we've done a school reunion, we've done a romantic couple weekend, we've done a team building event for a company, and it's actually looking at human behaviour, human social behaviour in those circumstances. So there, for example, in the team building one, you're looking at things like social hierarchy and alpha male behaviour and all these sorts of things. So it's very much an anthropological series with a bit of neuroscience thrown in, looking at actually how do we behave in these situations when we don't think anyone is watching.
And you also have a book coming out about the science and anthropology of fatherhood. Interesting. Tell us more.
Well, fathers, I've been researching fathers for about 10 years now and the relationship they form with their children. And it's a growing area of research, but there aren't many of us still doing that. And working with fathers, a lot of them, particularly expectant fathers, said there's nothing out there to tell me what it's going to be like, what's happening to me, what's the transition to becoming a father like, what do other fathers around the world do for this job? Because the dad's job is not really as prescribed as the mum's job. Because women give birth and it's a very biological experience, the options a woman has in relation to how she's going to fulfill that role are reasonably narrow. For a man, if you look around the world, the ways fathers fulfill that role is amazing. It's so diverse. So I wanted to produce a book which was a popular book, not an academic book, which could help people who are going to become fathers, dads already on the journey, and in fact us. We all have had a father, whether they've been particularly present in our life or not, and it's understanding our relationship with them and what they did for us. So it's covering things like the biology of fatherhood. We used to think that fatherhood wasn't a biological phenomenon. You learn to be a dad. Actually, it's hugely biological. There are hormones flowing everywhere. The brain changes. Your psychology goes through a massive change. So it's about that. It's explaining to dad what's happening. It's also looking at what happens to fathers when they become fathers. What's the role they adopt? Why do they adopt that role? And it's also looking at how fathers input into their child's development. So again, in the past, it was felt that only mothers actually inputted into that. Dads had no effect on how their child was going to develop. Actually, fathers have really strong and actually unique roles, particularly in relation to mental health and fostering independence in their children. So it's saying to dads, actually, you do have a role. This is what we know so far. It's really exciting. And it's just providing them with a little bit of information that's not really out there at the moment.
And we are stood in this beautiful building in front of the Bodleian Library in Oxford. The reason being, when we chose this spot, obviously, is because you're involved in Curiosity Carnival, which is taking place on the 29th of September. Can you tell us a bit more and what to expect and tell people to come down and, get involved?
Absolutely. It's really exciting, actually. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the question we've talked about today, but in a much bigger format. So we're going to have a debate about whether love is real. And it's not just going to be me banging on from my perspective. We're going to hopefully have someone from philosophy and someone bringing more from the sort of sociology, social sciences direction. And we're going to debate whether love is real. And we're going to open that up to the audience and get a discussion going, we hope, about what people think. Because it's that sort of question. We're not going to find a definite answer ever. And it's something that we can all be involved in. We've all experienced love. So it's a discussion and a vote on that, and it should be really, really exciting. We're hoping for lots of audience participation, so we hope we get lots of people signing up and signing up for the Carnival in general. It's an opportunity to come and actually see what this university does in action and meet the researchers and get involved, really. So it's going to be really exciting.
And for all of you that have tuned in, I've seen loads of you asking questions. I'm sorry that I couldn't get to them all. It was just they're kind of flooding in. So Anna hopefully will answer those for us this afternoon. But thank you for joining in, and thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much.